Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt, and today I want to do this kind of rapid fire question format where I try to answer as many questions as I possibly can in kind of a short amount of time, really get through some of the more common questions I've seen about language learning or just questions that I think might be useful to have an answer to. And so I'm just going to kind of transition here into another screen where you can see the questions, and I will try to get through as many language learning related questions as I possibly can. And so with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. How long does it take to be fluent in a language? Well, this is a difficult thing to answer, but I would say that if you look at the FSI totals that have our estimates for how long it takes to reach a competency level, we're looking at hundreds of hours to reach a fairly competent level at a language. Obviously, the more difficult the language is for a native English speaker, the more hours it's going to take, right? So something like Japanese or Chinese is going to take maybe twice as long as something like Russian or even German. So if you kind of think about studying the language for an hour every single day, and then you kind of reference those hour totals estimates from the FSI, you're probably talking about a couple of years to get fluent in a language, right? A Romance language, maybe 2 to 3 years, and an Asian language, maybe 4 to 5 years, if we just kind of think about studying for an hour a day and then looking at those totals. What is the best language learning app? Well, I actually don't think there is a best language learning app. I think that one of the best ways to approach learning a language is to use all of the kind of resources out there, right? Use different language learning apps, use different methods. So I think this is a trick question. Try not to think about language learning um, as this activity where there is the best app for learning things. I think that there are apps that are more effective than others or do things better than others, but try not to think of it this way. So there really is no best language learning app. Do I need to learn grammar when learning a language? I think that you do, though I don't think it needs to be as rigorous as you think it needs to be. I mean, I think that if you learn grammar, it helps you to enjoy compelling content and to notice it underneath the hood. So, for example, if you know how kind of conjugations work in the language or word order, you're able to better internalize those grammar concepts when you're reading or using compelling content. So I think that it can help you to just learn these concepts a little bit better, but over time it's really just going to be internalized by just learning the language and using compelling content. So to some extent you do need to learn grammar, though I don't think it needs to be as intense as you might think. What is the best way to learn grammar when learning a language? Well, I think that it's good to pick up a very small grammar book and just try to review it ever so often, right? Try to hit those main high value items within the language learning process, right? Learn how word order works or how to conjugate something in the present tense or things like that. But really over time, you're probably going to internalize these concepts and get a lot of the nuances by just being exposed to the language over time, right? Practicing speaking over the long term, reading a lot, listening a lot. You'll slowly get more comfortable with kind of the grammar of the language. And so I think that past kind of initial exposure on how to conjugate things and just being exposed to concepts, you'll learn it just through kind of being involved with the language learning process. But obviously, if you learn some grammar here and there before jumping into reading and stuff, you'll be able to recognize it more in context and it'll be a little bit easier in the end of the day. Is it possible to learn a language for free? Actually, I think it is. The thing about paid language learning apps or paid programs or things like that is it kind of does really two things for you. It gives you convenience, it gives you a path to move forward and where you don't have to really think about things. And it makes things more efficient, right? So obviously, if I pay for a conversation partner, it's a little bit easier to practice speaking rather than having to go seek out those free options, right? Or certain apps kind of give you some convenience to make things a little bit easier. But really, you can learn a language for free. I just think that some of the paid options out there make things a little bit more efficient or a little bit more convenient. How many words do you need to know to reach fluency? This is another tricky question because how do you define exactly how many words right? Are we talking about just the verb, right, the infinitive of the verb, or all the different kind of conjugations of that verb? So it really kind of depends. But if you look at kind of a lot of kind of spoken form in terms of how many words the average speaker uses, it's only a couple of thousands of words generally speaking. So if you think about it from that perspective, really, only a couple thousand words will probably take care of the majority of what's being said in spoken form. But that being said, when we talk about reading and things like that, the word total kind of increases dramatically. But I think that if we want to kind of expand it into that reading context, I think you're looking at tens of thousands of words in terms of all the forms of the word. So, like a verb, not just in the infinitive, but conjugated in the present tense and in the past and things like that. So, it's kind of a tricky question, but in spoken form, I would say maybe a couple thousand words, but really it's thousands upon thousands of words after that, especially if we're considering reading in this. How should I learn an alphabet? Well, I think that the first thing is just to be exposed to the alphabet in general. I've had this experience recently with Russian where you just want to kind of learn the characters in of itself, right? Review it like you would try to review anything. But what I found is that try to read in the language. Try to guess the pronunciation of words maybe in a beginner book or something like that to kind of test your knowledge, to use this kind of recall function when you're learning the alphabet, because it's great to just kind of memorize the characters in of itself, but really I think it adds a lot more power and it helps a lot more when you're trying to use it in context, right? So pull out a book and try to pronounce the word. And I think it's a little bit easier too when there's kind of like the I guess the English kind of pronunciation of the word to check yourself if you're kind of pronouncing the characters correctly. So I think it's a combination of just reviewing the list over time and just reading words in the language that you're learning to kind of reinforce those sounds in the alphabet and incrementally learn them. What is the best way to practice speaking when you have no one to practice with? Well, I think that this is something that a lot of people struggle with, where they don't have people to practice with in their local area. I think that really, if you can afford it, definitely try to get a conversation partner. It's a great way to practice speaking, and go into meetups or other people that are learning the language and try to talk with those people as well. Another option too is to just practice speaking by yourself. You can get a lot out of speaking practice just by practicing talking to yourself, whether it's giving a review of a movie you've seen or a book, or talking to yourself about how your day went. That's a way you can practice output without having to have another person with you. Obviously, it's good to have that back and forth where you're also working on your listening comprehension. But I do think that there's a lot of ways to practice speaking when you have no one to practice with in your local area. And one way is just to practice speaking by yourself or get a conversation partner. Should I learn a language with school or classes? Um, in my experience, it's probably not the best. I think that a lot of the classes and things like that tend to be pretty expensive for what you get, and it seems to be a little bit inefficient, right? You have to follow this kind of clear plan. When in a lot of ways, it makes a lot more sense to do what works best for you, right? Maybe you realize that you need to focus in on vocabulary acquisition, and you should do that, or you want to use more fun and compelling content. So I think that if you kind of are open to it, you can make a lot more progress and have a lot more fun by doing self-study versus going to language learning classes or classes for a specific language. How do I get motivated to learn a language? This one is also tricky. I think that you got to make sure that you have your why down when you're learning a language. However, I think that there's a lot of different strategies you can apply to get motivation. One is the 2 minute rule, which is just to study for 2 minutes, and then hopefully after studying for 2 minutes, you kind of have gotten over that initial hurdle of just getting started, and you'll get some motivation that way. Another way is to start incorporating fun and compelling activities into your language learning, which can really help quite a bit. And I think another thing is to set goals for yourself. Kind of seeing your progress build over time is another way to get motivated when you're learning a language. How long should your study time be? I think this is going to just depend on a person by person basis, but I've actually kind of seen that the average human attention span is pretty short. So I think that a good kind of rough period of time to study for is actually 15 to 30 minutes, and then just take a small incremental break. Just because you can get the most out of that time, you can be really focused. And really just kind of focus in on the language learning material and then take a break, right? And get the most out of it versus kind of these long marathon sessions. But I would say anywhere in between kind of an hour is good, though I kind of prefer 15 to 30-minute increments with short breaks here and there. Which language should I learn? I think that this is a trick question because you should learn the language that you want to learn. I think that it can be a mistake to try to learn a language that's going to be the easiest for you, or it's going to be the most useful language, because learning a language takes a long time and you're likely to get burned out. So, in my opinion, learn the language that you want to learn, right? Have good reasons to learn it, and learn it because you want to and you're going to have fun with it, right? Rather than kind of some other external reason. How should I learn a language as a beginner? Well, I think that the biggest thing you can do as a beginner is learn new words, right? Learn words, because vocabulary is the kind of core foundation for learning a language. So try to pick up the 1,000 most common words in the language. Try to get a vocabulary of common verbs and adjectives and prepositions, because you're going to see them over and over again. And try to get yourself a light foundation in grammar, just so that you can understand some compelling content, whether that's hitting the core items like word order or conjugations and things like that. And then, as soon as you possibly can, I would start to try to read in the language that you're learning, because reading is just a huge way to build your vocabulary and grammar over time. And then start trying to use compelling activities, practice listening, try to play video games in a foreign language, watch Netflix shows, try to have some fun activities where you're going to have fun, but you're also going to be learning the language at the same time. But kind of prior to that, try to pick up as many words as you can and get a light foundation in grammar. Can I learn a language by speaking? I think that solely learning a language by speaking is not the best method out there. I know that for a lot of people, the objective for learning a language is speaking. However, I think that you want to incorporate all the aspects of language learning into your kind of studying overall, because you're going to have better results by doing that, right? So focus in on vocabulary acquisition, practice listening, work on some grammar. I know that speaking is the goal for a lot of people, and you can obviously incorporate that, but try not to neglect the other areas. Can I learn a language using Netflix? You can, though, like I said in the prior answer, I wouldn't rely on just one method to learn a language, right? Try to use all the resources out there, right? There's good apps that are great for one specific activity, and there's great strategies that help you to practice another skill. So, you can definitely get a lot out of Netflix or video games or any fun and compelling activity, but definitely just use all the things that you have available to you to learn new words, to practice listening, to practice speaking, to get better at grammar, right? Just focus on the core aspects of the language learning process, which is like vocabulary, listening, grammar, etc., um, and try to use everything at your disposal when you're learning. How do you improve your accent in another language? I think that this is something that just slowly builds over time. It's, in my opinion, very challenging to reduce your accent over time, just because there's, a lot of people that have lived in a country for a long time, they've learned the language and they still have an accent. So I think you have to just keep with it and slowly just keep getting better at the language. But obviously, if you can put some time into practicing speaking and really working in on it, that's just the best way. You have to put the time and energy in, but just, I think, realize that it is going to take a long time to kind of slowly improve that, and it's just going to be, to a large extent, a factor of time. What are the best goals for learning a language? I think that some of the best goals for learning a language are having a kind of a time-based goal, right? Have a goal about how many hours you've studied the language. I think that's a great measurable thing that you can kind of keep track of, and it's going to help you to show where you're at relative to maybe some scales out there like the FSI. But also, it's just something that's very easy to track. Another thing too is to try to have a goal around learning new words. I think that's a great goal to have, and have a goal around getting to fun and compelling content in your process, because learning a language takes so long. You want to be having fun in the process overall. How do you have fun learning a language? Well, I think that you have to ask yourself, like, what do you enjoy? If we think about some of the fun and compelling activities out there, you can play a video game while learning a language at the same time. You can watch Netflix shows. You can read fun and interesting content. You can listen to podcasts and YouTube videos. I think that the way I would approach this is to think about what you're interested in. What do you like, or what do you want to specifically do? Maybe you love to read, and thus you want to read classic fiction in the language that you're learning, right? And so, if that's the case, try to slowly get to a place where you're using that compelling content in your language learning process. Maybe you love video games, and you can start playing video games in the language that you're learning. There's just so many ways to approach it, but I would ask, just ask yourself, what do you enjoy doing, and what kind of content do you want to kind of experience? Maybe you're interested in a certain subject, and try to kind of combine those two in your overall language learning process to have more fun. Is learning a language worth it? I think it is, though I think that in some cases people are learning a language for not the best reasons. you can really learn a lot about yourself when you're learning a language. And obviously, there's a lot of benefits and gains from that. But I think that you just want to always be assessing your reasons for learning a language. And it can be just for fun, or maybe you have professional reasons for learning it. But I think that the key to answering this question is really to look at your current situation. What do you value? And if you kind of are really honest with yourself, I think that you'll arrive at the answer of whether or not it's worth it for you. How do you get over a plateau when learning a language? Well, I think that a lot of it comes down to consistency and discipline, right? And tracking your progress with goals. Usually, when we're struggling with a plateau, it kind of comes down to two factors, right? You're not having fun with the language, or you're not feeling like you're making progress. And so, if you feel like you're not making progress, try to identify kind of what you're struggling with and then tackle it head on, right? Try to be consistent with that activity that you're struggling with. Maybe you feel like you're not getting better at listening. Well, then start trying to, practice listening for 30 minutes every single day to get over that struggle. Maybe you realize that you're really grinded down by the language learning app that you're using, you're not having fun. Well, try to start using compelling activities, whether it's Netflix or reading in the language that you're learning. I think that try to identify the problem and then tackle it with a solution head on, and try to be consistent overall. Can and should you learn more than one language at a time? You definitely can. However, I think that it's probably best to try to focus in on one language at a time, just because it takes so long to learn a language, and it's a lot of energy and effort. And I think that you'll make slower progress if you're just kind of all your language learning time is spent between multiple languages. Obviously, it's just going to depend on what you value and what you want to do. But I think that a lot of the language learning kind of fun comes from using compelling activities, and you have to get to that place. And if your kind of time is split between multiple languages, it's going to take longer to get there. So I think that it's going to depend on your situation. But I would definitely, if you can help it, try to focus in on one language, because I think you can make more progress in the end of the day and probably have more fun as well. When should you start learning another language? Well, I think it's whenever you're ready. There really is no ending point within learning a language. There's always more to learn, opportunities to get better. And so I would say that try to reach a skill level where it's pretty competent. But that's just kind of my perspective, and then move on. But I think that in the end, when you feel like it's time, and you have that desire to learn it, learn a new language, go for it. And I mean, you might get a little bit rusty with the last language that you've learned, but you can pick it back up, and kind of brush the cobwebs off. So I think that the key here is just when you feel that desire, definitely go for it if it makes sense just with your overall values. How do you maintain the languages that you've learned? Well, I think that the best way to maintain languages is to be at a relatively high skill level where you can use fun and compelling content, right? So if you're at a skill level where you can read the news in the language that you have learned, right, or play video games, then you can do these kind of fun and compelling activities in the language that you've already learned, right? Like, and maybe you enjoy reading the news. Well, if you have that ability with the language that you've just learned, it's not a ton of work, and thus you're continuing to get better and maintaining that language. So I think the best way to maintain languages is to have reached a level where you're pretty competent, and you can start using compelling content to kind of maintain them. What is a good language learning routine? Well, I think it's going to depend on, where you are in the skill, I guess, what's your overall skill level in the language, right? Whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced. But I would just kind of focus in on the things that are going to bring you the most value, and try to break it down into certain subsections of time, right? Whether it's 15 or 30 minutes, and really try to hit those core areas head on, whether it's vocabulary acquisition, listening, etc. So I think that it's just going to depend on your overall life, but I would focus in on the things that are going to bring you the most value, and try to be consistent with those times and really plan it out ahead of time. What are your best tips for learning a language? In my opinion, one of the biggest things that really brought me a ton of value was starting to read in another language. It was so big for my vocabulary acquisition and grammar, and I think that a lot of people would get a lot of value out of practicing to read in the language they're learning. You can get a ton out of it. So I would say try to read as soon as you can. And of course, also, as I mentioned many times in the past, try to use fun and compelling content in your language learning. It's just a great way to have fun and then get a lot of value out of your language learning. I think that a lot of people need to have more fun in their language learning. So definitely try to have fun as well in your language learning. And that's what I had for today's video. So let me know what you think. If you have any answers to the questions we went over, let me know in the comment section below. I'd be curious to know what you think would be a great answer for some of these questions. And with all that being said, I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.